Defending Israel with David Harris on JBS is made possible in part by a generous gift in memory of Eric and Mira J. Spector, the Paul and Lynn Late Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation.
Hello JBS viewers, I'm David Harris and welcome to Defending Israel. We have a very special guest again this week, someone you may well know already. His name is John Spencer. Particularly since October 7th, you may have seen his name attached to articles, television interviews, social media posts. John is a research professor at West Point. He is a combat veteran of the United States Army, having risen to the rank of major. He has also served as a colonel in the California State Guard, and he's also associated with the Modern War Institute and the Urban Warfare Project. In other words, he's a perfect guest for Defending Israel. John, welcome.
David, thanks for having me.
John, among the many things you've written, one thing really popped out at me. It's one sentence, and I'm quoting it from memory. You wrote, "I'm not Jewish, but I'm a champion of the truth." Explain, if you would, to JBS viewers what you meant and mean by that.
Sure. So I've written over 40 articles, made 5 trips to Israel, 4 into Gaza with the IDF, and somehow the agents of disinformation believed I was pro-Israel, which I am, absolutely, or I was Jewish, or I was paid by Jewish community, and it's sad that we have to live in the world as I'm first and foremost pro-truth. And from October 7th on, all I've seen was lies. And I happened to have a lot of time researching very specific things that were occurring and could put what was happening in Gaza in comparison to what came before. So I've had to tell people that, and it's sad that I have to do that I'm not Jewish, I'm not Israeli. I'm pro-truth. I believe in right and wrong. I was raised in the military a certain way to believe in values and to fight for those. So if I had to be the champion of truth, and to be frank, to be champion of Israel in the fact that they are following the laws of war, they are doing beyond anything anybody's ever done in war to protect civilians, then I became that guy.
So let's take some of those allegations that you've been faced with. Israel is committing genocide, we're told. What's John Spencer's response?
Baseless, ridiculous, disgusting is my response. Both as a person of the truth and as a researcher who's been on the ground, or who knows what words have meaning. Like that word has a very specific meaning defined by the Genocide Convention with specific criteria, and none of that, not the intent, not the actions, are present in Israel's operations against Hamas in Gaza. It's actually, which is the dystopian world we live in, a mountain of evidence. In some places, a mountain of aid that I've seen in multiple places in Gaza, contrary to that baseless claim.
Another claim, very closely connected, John. Israel commits daily war crimes against Gaza and targets the civilian population. John Spencer's response.
Another baseless claim. Words have meaning. That word, war crime, amongst the war crime, crime against humanity, and genocide, definable. It requires intent, it requires action, and nothing has ever been presented. Actually, bodies of evidence on what Israel does to protect civilians, on how it doesn't take strikes, depending on the civilian situation, and how it feeds the enemy's population. The war crime requires intent and evidence and investigation. But we live in a world where journalists, pundits, influencers can throw out words based on TikTok videos or their own opinions. And what I say is that you can have your own opinion, but you can't have your own facts. And the fact is, Israel's not committing war crimes. And actually, in recent news, Israel will investigate any report of misconduct by the IDF in a very abnormal, speedy, transparent way, which is what, like the United States and others, moral, ethical militaries do. And that's the case. So it's another baseless, really libel.
And John, how do you respond to a third accusation you've heard more than once, I'm sure? Israel is using disproportionate force against Gaza. What do you say?
I say that, again, the people that are saying that are misinformed on the meaning of that word because they're misconstruing it with the fundamental principle of the law of war proportionality. So by saying disproportionate, then they're trying to take a word and create a new meaning. I've argued against even the United States president who said that once. Actually, in war, you absolutely want to use overwhelming force to defeat your enemy so that you end it quickly. Disproportionate means it's disproportionate to the military objective, excessive civilian harm, or you're not doing anything to mitigate civilian harm. So yet again, it's another word that people are trying to give a new meaning and then make a baseless allegation.
And three other words that you hear quite often, John, are international humanitarian law, or IHL. And the accusation being that Israel there too is trampling on international humanitarian law, to which you say?
One, I like to use the term international law of armed conflict because there's actually a European evolution of trying to insist on calling it international humanitarian law, but fine. The problem is that, and I saw this coming, and again, with great knowledge comes great responsibility. Why I became so vocal is that I saw the major groups, humanitarian rights activist groups, and groups within the United Nations trying to convince populations, political leaders, what the law of armed conflict says, and trying to do misinformation. So they take a kernel of truth and then they do their own analysis and try to say that Israel is violating some law. But when you get into the particulars of it, not some of the baseless allegations like we've seen in the ICJ or the ICC without any evidence, is that there is no evidence of Israel violating the international humanitarian law, or what I call international law of armed conflict. Words have meanings. Each one of these frameworks, like the laws of war, which I strongly believe in, have definable, measurable standards, definitions, but we have these groups who are joined in really trying to delegitimize, to create a double standard. I call it the Israeli standard on what the law actually says. And no, Israel's not violating it.
John, for you, what would success look like? It's now more than 18 months since Hamas triggered the war. What, in your view, needs to be the right outcome if there is such a thing as a right outcome?
Sure. So I study war for a living. So when I make a statement like that, I analyze the objectives of both sides. For Hamas, they've never stated the objectives for the war, but they definitely stated their objective as a political organization, which is the destruction of Israel and the death of all the Jewish people. For Israel, after October 7th, like all nations can, it set its goals very, very definably. Bring the hostages home, every one of them, remove Hamas from political power, remove its military capability, and ensure no threat comes from Gaza ever again. That's what the end state looks like. Now, people can judge, well, you've been doing it for 18 months and you haven't achieved that. Then again, you have to study war in the context. There have been many times where Israel has been prevented from achieving those goals by the international community and other groups because Israel lives in this world where it often gets stopped before victory. Really, Israel's history in war. But it's a clearly definable end state. It's just whether it is capable. I definitely believe Israel can do it, but I also understand the context. There are many variables that will determine whether Israel gets to that point.
There are those who point to the end of the Second World War and say Germany was denazified and Gaza needs to be de-radicalized. Is that just a an easy sort of set of words, or do you see a pathway to de-radicalize a region that has been radicalized for so many decades through the mosque, through the media, through the schools, through the UN-funded schools? What do you do with an ideology as opposed to an armed group per se?
Well, so I absolutely believe the de-radicalization is necessary. It's the only way to end the cycle of violence. It is absolutely historically possible. Like you said, in Germany, I actually quote General Eisenhower, front page of a newspaper, saying it will take 50 years to denazify the German population. And he was willing to do it. It didn't take that long for many reasons, but it takes time. Step one is to remove the guns from those radicalizing the population and stop the radicalization, right? So that is like you said, the UNRWA books, the UNRWA schools. You have to stop the radicalization, but it's absolutely historically possible to de-radicalize a population after they have been defeated in war, as in their political apparatus has been removed and replaced with something else. It is achievable, and I argue strongly it's what must happen. You must demilitarize and de-radicalize the Gaza Strip.
Can that be done without confronting the head of the snake, if you will, for so many, which is Iran, which has been the patron, the supplier of weaponry, of ideology for Hamas and like-minded groups?
In Gaza, I actually do believe it can, although thanks to Israel, the Islamic regime in Iran is weaker than it's been in a very long time. And its proxies have been severely depowered, basically. Gaza is different because it is geographically separated. Now, if you were just asking me that question about Hezbollah and Lebanon, it's much more difficult. But in Gaza, because Israel does and has done what many militaries have failed to do in war, which is isolate the enemy from its external support, men, weapons, equipment, funding. It is unfortunate that Hamas built this capability thanks to the Islamic regime in Iran, but it absolutely is possible. But we do have to take on the head of the snake, and it can never have a nuclear weapon. But I understand the difficulty in a geopolitical environment for Israel to do that alone. It's not Israel's problem. It's everyone's problem.
So, wading into current issues, the United States has chosen to take a diplomatic approach. The optimists say that it comes with much more muscle. The pessimists say it looks like Obama 2.0. Where do you fall on the spectrum of diplomacy versus deterrence, or for that matter, even attack with respect to Iran, the head of the snake?
So what I usually tell people is I don't do politics, but I do war, which is politics by other means. So I understand, I mean, in order to understand that question, you have to understand the U.S. political system at the time being, the major camps and all of this. And I think it is a rational strategy to show that you've tried all diplomatic means first with clear goals that you must deconstruct the entire nuclear program. But in a very political environment, you have to show that you tried all other means before using military power, which I still think is an option. And I don't think even President Trump has said it's not, but he wants to go through this process, even if it's futile and it's been tried in the past, to show all representations, which in a political environment you have to be cognizant of. And I know in Israel, they're very cognizant of this, so that when you get to that moment, you can say, look, I tried by all other means. I mean, war is about deterring action, and when deterrence fails, to prevail in the use of force.
You yourself served, as I mentioned in the introduction, as a combat veteran. I think you did 2 tours of duty in Iraq. Am I correct?
Yes.
And you're also a specialist in urban warfare. What did you learn from your Iraq experience that either feels like or distinguishes itself from what Israel's facing in Gaza today?
That's actually a great question. I did do 2 combat tours in Iraq, experienced my own hell of urban warfare in places like Sadr City, which is a neighborhood within Baghdad of 2 million. But I also began studying everything that's ever happened in urban warfare. So I of course see some similarities when I'm in Gaza with the IDF to the density of the buildings, the enemy that doesn't wear clothes, that uses human shields. But I also can appreciate the complexity that is Gaza that the IDF have faced that I argue through comparative analysis no military's ever faced. Not me, not anyone else. I mean, it's an environment that was built for war against an enemy who not only tries to blend in with its population, is trying to get its population killed, has this 400 miles of tunnels, has prepared every inch of it for war, house bombs, road bombs, you name it. So while I see some of the similarities, of course, that the soldiers are overwhelmed in that environment can face because I experienced that, I really rely on my research and to show the immense challenges the IDF have faced and prevailed against those challenges.
John, you've said something which has really rattled many of Israel's fiercest critics because you come so credentialed, both as a combat veteran and as a admired research professor. You've said that no other army has tried to achieve the level of ethical morality. These are my words, so please correct them. The standards that Israel has tried to apply in dealing with this extraordinarily complex wartime situation in Gaza. Do you stand by that comment that no other army has attempted this standard of performance against all the onslaught from the media and others who want to delegitimize you, John Spencer?
Absolutely, I stand by that comment. And I stand by it because it stands on itself. It's not, I mean, there is a bit of analysis from having gone there and seeing the IDF doing these things, but it actually goes through comparative analysis, listing out and observing all the measures that Israel does to prevent civilian harm, what we call civilian harm mitigation measures. Israel has implemented more than any military in the history of war, trying to protect civilians and in their operations. Where all the criticism comes, and that comment stands alone, and I could list out, the 10 ways that Israel does that nobody's ever tried, from the phone calls to the facial recognition to the handing out their maps to the daily pauses. I mean, it's just a long list, and it stands on itself. But the only way that people have tried, which again, I had to point out to them, that's not how this works. That's not how war works. It's not how war assessments work, is that they do effects-based assessments. No matter what John Spencer says or my research shows, they say, but look at the damage. Look at the number of civilians killed. And I'm sure we're not going to get into the lies that have come out about the numbers, but that's not how war works. Even the law of proportionality says you have to take all reasonable and feasible measures to protect civilians. And Israel has done more of that than anybody else. But everybody who wants to criticize it, but look at the number of destroyed buildings and all of these things, which is completely effects-based assessments. It is not the way that it works. My statement stands by itself.
And on the question of humanitarian assistance, which has been another one of these headline issues, is Israel providing enough? Is it blocking it? What exactly is Israel's responsibility? There are those, on the one hand, who say, did Britain and the United States provide humanitarian assistance to civilians in Dresden and Leipzig during the Second World War? There are others who say, no, Israel has an obligation under international humanitarian law or the law of conflict. What says John Spencer?
John Spencer says that people want short answers to really hard questions.
Especially on television.
Especially on television. Israel has done more to go above and beyond the legal obligations to provide humanitarian aid to the enemy's population than any other military in any similar context. There is examples, even in World War II, yes, of providing humanitarian aid after defeating the enemy, after the battle is won. This is in the midst of it, when it is validated by everybody that the enemy, Hamas, is taking the aid meant for the people and using it for their own means and to maintain power. Even the Israeli court ruled who is not always favorable to the Israeli government and the IDF, that there is no legal obligation. Israel is not occupying Gaza right now. It doesn't have control, and the enemy is taking the aid. But I also study warfare, so each moment in time has to be looked at in the context of it. What is the situation on the ground? But it's undeniable the amount of aid that Israel has sent in to feed the enemy's population, despite what the enemy is doing with it.
John, let's go back to your tours of duty in Iraq. Was this a topic of discussion in the Pentagon or out in the field among American servicemen about what was our nation's responsibility to those we were targeting in the humanitarian space?
No, it wasn't. So I was a part of the invasion of Iraq where we used overwhelming force to destroy the enemy and remove them from power. And we did that within weeks. And we used overwhelming force. If you look at the number of bombs we dropped and the amount of forces that we put into the country rapidly, immediately after the enemy surrendered, as in took off their uniforms, walked away, threw down their weapons, I was involved in providing humanitarian aid to the population. Absolutely. But it was after victory, after the enemy acknowledged that they had been defeated. And that's a very important nuance that people want to forget. And then the other is when I deployed back into Iraq in 2008, during the height of the sectarian violence, basically on the verge of civil war in Baghdad, I was again providing humanitarian aid, but it's a very important nuance that Israel's not fighting a counterinsurgency right now, like we were for years. Israel's fighting a war against the existing power in Gaza, and that has a framework, it has legal obligations, and it has nuances that people want to throw away.
I know it's a much more complicated subject and we don't have the time, especially on television, but give us a peek at some of the ethical questions. For example, Hamas leaders who surround themselves with family members or live in buildings where they deliberately place a kindergarten or a daycare center in the building, knowing that Israel's Achilles heel is this moral question about, do we attack nonetheless to prevent other atrocities? Or by attacking, is there too much collateral damage? How does one weigh this, not just as a military historian, but as an ethicist, as a philosopher? Help us understand this. Because the enemy knows this is the irony of the story is the enemy knows, doesn't it, that Israel's Achilles heel is its moral conscience.
Absolutely. So that morality of war has been debated, has been factored into from just war theory, centuries of morality work into creating these laws or rules, standards in war in these exact situations. And that's what that proportionality assessment. It has to be a real concrete objective, and then it can't be excessive. But really in the ethical, which is the standard and even the military holds itself to, this is where you get into these very complex human decisions of, and this is what I've seen in Gaza with the IDF, not even returning fire to places that they're being fired from because of that concern of the civilian collateral damage, where the goal for Hamas is the civilian death. And every one of them is a part of their strategy. For Israel, it's horrific. And they do put, this is that ethical decision, when they put themselves at very high risk, giving up their elements of surprise in order to protect civilians. And again, nobody wants to talk about that, but how much Israel does to announce their arrival, to do the precautions, to evacuate, to hand out their maps and daily messages is putting their soldiers at risk. And that's a part of that moral ethical framework where they are acknowledging that they will have to accept risk in themselves to protect the civilians that the enemy is trying to get killed, its own population.
Unbelievable. In our remaining minutes, I want to turn to another topic. You yourself have said you've been outspoken, you've written, you've spoken, you've visited Israel. Have you been surprised by the degree to which there has been support for Hamas and its actions in the West, beginning in the United States? The degree to which Western individuals and institutions have attacked you, attacked your credibility and those like you who've tried to make the case for this democratic nation, this ally of the United States, fighting for its very existence against a genocidal enemy. Did that catch you by surprise?
It absolutely did. Every element that has caught me by surprise, from this creating this Israeli standard to hold somebody to in war, to the protest using, even making up numbers, not even using Hamas's numbers, just making up numbers of children and women killed, and then repeating that over and over again, trying to make it true, flying the flag of a designated terrorist organization to include Hezbollah that killed American soldiers in Lebanon. It all has surprised me. The attacks on my work has surprised me, but what it hasn't done is deterred me. And this is what I tell everybody, is that, I mean, who I am is a fighter, is a protector, and the more you attack me, if somebody has a legitimate criticism of something that I've written or researched or something, I'm all for that. I'm an academic now. But when they attack me with just lies or innuendos about my motivations, it just drives me more to fight back against their attempts to silence me and create these double standards and this delegitimize Israel, because I think it really matters for even America, because American forces will be on the ground somewhere and these same groups will try this with us. So it really matters on so many different levels.
But John, again, briefly, what's gone wrong in America that so many otherwise respected institutions, universities, have taken the position you just described? What's gone wrong here?
There's a lot of societal problems, and we're in a battle for our soul. I've written about this in a completely different context, is that people need meaning, they need identity, but for some reason, this event caused people to misapply who is the oppressed, who is the oppressor, who is the good, who is the bad. It's an identity crisis, and I feel bad for some of these people, is that this is the cause they've chosen. Despite all the real awful things going on in the world, they picked the wrong side, they picked the wrong cause, and there's a societal problem, from the woke right, woke left, that all factors into this. It's just unfortunate that we have to fight for the truth to have a seat at the table in this world of disinformation, social media algorithms, all of this. And what I tell people is that the whole point is that we can't give up. You have to fight all of it. And
we haven't used the word yet, but to what extent, if at all, do you attribute this to anti-Semitism?
Well, it's come to be through my own experiences that there hasn't been another answer to the standards that people talk about, and even this war. Like, that's really weird to me. And really, I've come to the realization that there is no other answer, that at the root of this is anti-Semitism. Beyond even anti-Zionism or anti-Israel, there's something deeper underneath this. And I've come to my own realization in arguing against, like, that doesn't make any sense. Nobody's ever asked what the civilian to combatant ratio is in war. That's an Israeli question. And the further I dig is that, for me, there's only one logical answer, is that there's a root anti-Semitism to it.
And unfortunately, on that dispiriting, discouraging note, John, we have to end with my thanks to you for making yourself available to JBS viewers across the country and around the world. And JBS viewers, if you want more of John Spencer, first of all, you need to follow him on X, or Twitter as it's called. I think he has about 250,000 followers already. So add to that number. John, how do people find you on X?
X is at Spencer Guard.
Spencer
and all my
Guard.
writing, yes.
And he's also a frequent contributor to Newsweek and other publications. So please look him up. Follow this voice of truth, because he is a voice of truth. JBS viewers, thank you for watching Defending Israel. This is David Harris, and looking forward to see you again next week.